Joining us this evening. We've got 3 people in the call so far. I'm Tracy with Habitat. I think at this point, everybody probably has been here before, so you know how this works. We've got Caitie here teaching Introduction to Drywall tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to Caitie. If you've got questions anywhere along the line, feel free to unmute yourself. If you don't have audio, go ahead and type messages into chat and I'll relay them to Caitie, and she will stop also along the way to ask if there's any questions. So Caitie, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Like Tracy said, my name is Caitie and I will be leading the drywall workshop. This has been one of our return topics. It seems to be pretty popular and just super DIY friendly. Just a good topic to know stuff about. So I'm gonna go through, what I have, but please feel free to buzz in with questions or comments or anything. I am doing this solo, like I don't have a person recording me tonight. So if you can't hear me or can't see something, let me know. I'm gonna try to do my best, to give you guys a good show. So what I have planned tonight is I'm gonna talk a little bit about drywall in terms of material you would need for a project, tools you would need for a project, how you would get started, and then I'm going to show you, how we would hang and tape and mud drywall, and then go through patching a hole as well. So a lot of this is like transferable skills. Once you see me do it, or once you do it once, it's not a whole lot to patch, hang. It's all kind of the same 2 or 3 skills. So that makes it a fun, easy DIY project. So I'm going to just jump right in. And like Tracy said, if you have questions or, want to know anything specifically, just let me know. So I'm going to start talking about just drywall, the material itself. So you'll kind of hear it called sometimes different things: drywall, gypsum board, sheetrock. That's all the same thing. So that's what I'm holding right now, is just a little square of drywall. So basically the differences between all of that, drywall is kind of just like a umbrella term for the material itself. Sheetrock is actually just a name brand of drywall. So that's like DeWalt tools, right? Sheetrock, drywall. And then gypsum board, that's referring to what it's actually made out of. So this material that's on the inside is gypsum. That's something that they, mine some kind of ore and gets compressed together into this material that is drywall. So that's all of those terms mean. It's all the same thing. So typically drywall comes in big sheets. Common sizes are 4 foot by 8 foot sheet. So that's like sheet of plywood, a sheet of drywall, that's kind of the standard size. You can get them a lot longer. So if you're doing like, you're drywalling your whole house or you're drywalling a whole garage, you're going to want sheets that are nice and big, cover a lot of space. That's kind of important for if you're going to be doing a big project. You don't want to have tiny squares like this that you're piecing together. You want to have nice big long pieces that go in, and then you have one long seam. You don't want to have lots of squares to try to mud and take around. That would just be a mess and take a really long time. So that's the benefit of having big sheets. If you are just doing a small repair or a small patch, we'll talk about some ways that you won't need to buy an entire sheet of drywall, but it's also really easy to cut. So if you end up needing to buy one sheet, you can cut that down, get it into your car, no problem. So it's still an easy DIY friendly task. So another thing about the material itself is it comes in different size thicknesses. So the common size is 1/2 inch. I think that's what this is. This is 5/8. So 1/2 inch, 5/8. I think those are both common. They have made other sizes that are really thin, or like a 1/4 inch, or really thick, like 1 inch. So this would really only come in handy if you need to, patch something like a big space that you need to match a thickness that's already there. So if I already have a whole wall of 1-inch drywall and I put up 1/2 inch, then I'm going to have a weird 1/2 inch space, right? So in that case, you would need to buy the specific size. A 1/4 inch, it's super thin. That would be great if like maybe this wall is a little bit old, a little bit damaged. I don't want to rip it all out, but I'm just going to kind of cover it with a new layer. 1/4 inch would work for that, right? So that kind of stuff is going to be project specific, but do make sure that that's something you're paying attention to if your project calls for it, right? One other thing to note in terms of drywall is they do make what's also called green board, and this is the same thing as drywall, but it is colored green. Sometimes it's colored purple. I think the Tacoma habitat is purple, but this is moisture resistant drywall. So this would be something to use in a bathroom or a kitchen, like behind your backsplash or something. It basically is the same thing as your gypsum board, but it has an oil mixture added into it, and that helps make it more water resistant. So that would be something to use in your bathroom if you are thinking about that before you start your project. So that's kind of the background on drywall. I'll start jumping into some more of the materials and tools that you would need. So in terms of materials, you basically need some kind of drywall to either start your project or do a patch. You need, I got a really big box of joint compound here. Joint compound is also what we like use the jargon term mud for, but basically this is your stuff that's going to go on and fill in all your seams, any kind of patching that you're going to do. They do make, some kind of different types of joint compound. Really, you need all purpose. That's going to be what gets your basic job done. I've never used anything but all purpose, but I guess if you have a certain, like if you need something that dries really fast or something that's lightweight, they have those kind of different varieties, but all purpose is your safest bet if you're not sure. So you need some of this. And then the last thing that you need is tape, which I have a big roll of paper tape. They do also make mesh tape, which I don't have any mesh tape with me, but I have a patch kit that I'm going to show you later in the workshop, and it basically looks just like that. So in terms of the differences between tape, I'll talk a little bit more about that when I actually do a demonstration of how to use it. But the basics is your paper tape is cheaper, and that's what's most commonly used. Your mesh tape, you can save one step in the process, but it's more expensive and it's more likely to show through in your final outcome of your drywall, because this paper tape is, really thin. The mesh is a little bit thicker, so it's more likely that you'll be able to tell at the end product, especially if you're not a pro, which most of us are not, right? So we will get more into all of those materials a little bit later. And I'm going to go into a couple of tools that you might need. So in terms of tools, drywall is pretty friendly. Don't need a whole lot. And that makes it really easy to be able to do these kind of projects at home. So you need a couple of spackle knives. These are 2 different kinds, 2 different sizes right here. These are what we're going to use to do all of our mudding. So basically it's flat and it's got a little bit of give, which helps us when we're trying to push joint compound into our gaps. The sizes, I guess they all have a specific function. You can also buy these in like a pack of 3 that come in 3 different sizes, but this one is great for like a patching kind of situation because it's not too big. You're not going to get a ton of extra mud on the wall. So I kind of like you know, this is a 4-inch, I think. So for 3 to 5 inch is a pretty good patch size. This one is a 12-inch, and this is really great for seams since it has such a big surface area. I can really cover, you know, and get a nice layer over my seam, and it'll help me blend that into the rest of the wall. So this would be great if you were doing, you know, like that garage project where you have lots of full sheets, lots of long seams. This kind of thing would come in handy for sure. Then this is just a mud pan to hold your joint compound. So basically I can hold this in one hand and I can have my putty, my spackle knife, and I could just work out of this. So I can move across my project with ease. This is certainly not necessary. You could just dip it into your bucket, but this makes you a lot more mobile, right? So that's kind of our mudding tools. One other thing that I really like to recommend, this is a rasp. And basically this just kind of has like it's like a cheese grater for drywall, but this is going to help us clean up all our edges, which I'll show you a little demonstration of that too. But this will just help give you a cleaner surface and make your final product look a lot more seamless, right? So then in terms of cutting, I have one saw here. This is called a keyhole saw. Basically, it's got a pointy end here. I don't know if you can see this. It's got a pointy end down here. So this is great for punching a hole into drywall if you need to start a hole. And then it's got nice big teeth, which are great for cutting drywall. So this is one of our options, and I'm going to show you guys how to use this too. And then the other magic trick to cutting drywall is a good old razor knife. So I'll show you the easiest way to cut big pieces. This is good if you have like one sheet and you want to cut it in half. A razor knife is perfect. If you have a hole where you need to cut out like an irregular shape, then a keyhole saw is perfect. And all of these hand tools you can buy at Lowe's or Home Depot, and you know, they're all less than 10 bucks. So you could get everything you need for a pretty good price. And you could also look at renting tools or getting used tools. These are all pretty common things that you should be able to find, no problem. The last thing that you will need, and the only power tool in this workshop, is some kind of drill or driver. Typically, I would recommend, like, say that you could do it with just a screwdriver or something, but this, you really do need some kind of power drill, either battery like I have or a corded drill. And this is going to be for screwing in all of our drywall, which is how it's installed. And this is a pretty crucial component of drywall, and I'll show you the reason being when we get to the install in just a minute. So the last thing before I start doing some demos, I know this is a lot of talking in the beginning, but I did want to go over some of the common problems that you might come encounter with in drywall. So one is holes in your drywall, right? Like this one, I don't know if you guys can see this, which we're actually going to go through how to patch this tonight. So if you have a hole, you want to know how, stay tuned. Some other ones are cracks. So cracks could mean a lot of things. It could mean that you had some damage to your drywall previously, and you know, something is settling, or some kind of damage to the whole piece of drywall. If you just want a quick fix, you could just mud, sand it, repaint it. That'll be good to go. Sometimes cracks could mean something else is going on. So if you need to investigate further, you might need to do that with a crack. Whereas a hole, most likely we just ran something into the wall, or you know, the doorknob hit the wall, something like that. A few other things, you could have termite damage in your drywall, and I have a picture. I have a whole slide set that I'm going to email out to you guys, or Tracy will email in the follow-up, and you can see pictures of all of this, so you'll be able to identify what it looks like. But termites is another possible damage you could have with drywall. And then another really common one is water damage. And water damage, you'll be able to see it pretty easily. Obviously, if it's wet, that's a good sign that you have some water damage, but also could have a stain. It's like off-colored, and you can kind of see where water was or currently is. And water damage, unfortunately, you will have to remove the spots that are damaged and remove a little bit past that. So if I have a water spot right here, I'm going to remove this much, patch it with new stuff. And the reason being because like the gypsum that we were looking at, right? This is kind of spongy when it's wet. So if it's just wet in one little section, there's a good chance that it's soaked a little further than that. We want to remove anything that might be damaged in the case of a water damage situation. And then just replace all of it, right? So I'm going to keep rolling, but if you guys have questions, feel free to chat or unmute. It's a pretty small group, so feel free to jump in. And then I'm going to start by going into how we install our drywall. And this would be if we're doing, you know, a big project. We're going to be hanging some full sheets. I got a kind of a long one behind me, and so I'm going to show you how to cut it first with a razor knife. And basically, I'm going to explain it and then do it because I don't want to talk away from the camera. But I'm going to mark out a line in pencil. And right now, I'm just making up a distance because I don't need it to be a specific size. But I'm just going to draw it out in pencil first. Okay, so for me, I just used a big square here, a framing square. You could also use a T-square. You could use anything that's straight to just help get a straight line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my razor knife and I'm going to score it really lightly once just to get, make sure I'm following my pencil line. Don't put all your force into it right now. Just get a nice line, get a little groove for your knife blade to follow. And then I'll do a second pass through with a little bit more pressure and try to follow that same initial groove. Okay, so that's my first run through. A second, I'm going to do one more for good luck. Okay, and now that I got it scored, you can actually just bend this whole piece in half. So I'm going to come behind it and just push right near my groove. And my snap happened below the table, but basically this is what happens. And I'm cut all the way through my gypsum, that layer, right? But the back of my drywall still has a paper layer on the back, which, let's see if I can turn around. This looks like this. It's just a thin layer of paper. Sorry, this is bigger than I thought. So now I'm just going to take my knife again and run it down that corner in the back to cut my paper. And boom, just like that, I have two pieces of drywall now. So that's the easiest way to cut one of our big pieces here. I'm actually gonna, I think, need to cut it again so I can fit on my table. So again, just those two lines through. Bend it, break the gypsum, cut along my paper layer, and boom, and good to go. So I'm actually going to do the same thing on this other sheet, and this is just, I way overestimated the size of my table here, so that's always fun. hopefully that reassures everybody of how easy it is, because I just cut it like 3 times right now. Okay, so now that I got my 2 pieces, this may be kind of hard to tell on camera, but basically, if you look flat down this, this edge here where I have my hand has a bit of a taper, and it's pretty subtle, but basically this is where I want my edge to be. So if I was doing this, I would put this on my, into the corner, and this into the center of my room, and meet another tapered edge. And the reason being that taper is going to create just the slightest dip in here, where I'm going to be putting all of my tape and all of my mud, and this is going to help me give my finished wall a nice flat look, right? So that's the idea. Sorry, I just wanted to get some blocks so I can show you guys how we're going to install this tonight. So I'm going to just put some blocks under here that would be my pretend studs in a wall, right? In my wall or ceiling. And this is what I'm going to use to show you guys how to drill into it. And it's also really helpful if, I lost my pencil, if you kind of mark out where you need to be drilling ahead of time instead of just guessing. And this is pretty crucial because we definitely want our screws to be all the way sunk in our material. So that's kind of the next bit, and the reason why you need a drill rather than just trying to do it by hand with a screwdriver or something not powered. So these are, you guys can see these, my drywall screws, and it's just a Phillips head. Definitely can't see that. A Phillips head with some coarse threads, and this is what I'm going to use to install all of my drywall. So the only really catch with these screws is we need to make sure that when I'm drilling them in, they're all the way sunk in to my material. So I'll show you guys, it's going to be loud, so just bear with me. Okay, so basically I got a screw in here, and when I run my finger over it, I feel just the slightest indent into my drywall. So I can't have my screw sticking out. If it's sticking out too tall, then that's no good, because when I go to mud over it, I'm going to have a screw sticking out, and you'll be able to see that in the final product. So let's say I do it just like this, and when I run my finger over it, I'm hitting my screw. So that means I need to sink it in further until I can run over and I'm flat. And there is such a thing as going too far. If you drill it in too far, then it basically will just break right through the gypsum, and then you don't really have any structural integrity. So it's basically like it's not there at all. So you do want to go slow and get that perfect depth of the screw. So, and I always just do a little check. Perfect. So if you, let's say you hang all this up, you start doing your mudding, and you are going through with your putty knife, spackle knife, and boop, you hit a screw. You already have mud on top of it. No big deal. Just go ahead and get your drill back out, drive it in. This is definitely something, whenever you catch it, you want to just go ahead and address it. Otherwise, it will show through. If you wait until your mud dries, it's going to be more of a mess. So whenever you find that, just go ahead and drill it in, right? So now I got my tapered seam in the middle, all of my screw holes. So that means I am ready for tape and mud. So first thing is my tape. And I have a bit of damage on the end, so I'm just going to rip that off. So the paper tape, like I said, this is the most commonly used, cheapest tape. It's super easy. So for me to get my distance marked out, I'm going to eyeball it to right here, right? And then you can use your putty knife to cut it by just holding it flat, ripping your tape. It basically just creates a nice clean edge and it rips easy. You don't need to knife it or anything. I wouldn't recommend just pull ripping it because that kind of makes it more jagged, right? So now I got my piece of tape, and in the tape, maybe you can see there's a seam right here, and that basically is to give me a little corner. So I want to just follow my seam and just bend it slightly to give myself a bit of a groove like this. And the idea is this groove goes right into my crack here. And just doing a fit to make sure that that looks good, which it does. So before I put this down, I'm actually going to go ahead and put a little bit of mud into my seam, and this is going to help just hold my tape in place. And then I'm going to cover the whole thing in mud and then get it all smoothed out. So I'm going to go ahead and load up my pan here with a bit of mud. So just give me a second to do that. This is also another time when a smaller knife comes in handy because I can use that to load up and do my initial mudding, and then use my bigger one to help with that whole seam. All right. So to start, I'm just going to put a little bit of mud in my seam, and I basically want to cover it just about where my tape is going to go. So, you know, this is just a little bit wider than my tape, which is perfect. I don't want to do too much, but just enough that it's going to help me stick. I'll try to kind of spread that down the board. And all of this mudding, the mudding is, I think, by far the hardest part of drywall. You just kind of have to get a feel for the tool, so just don't be scared to try it out. So I got my mud down. I'm going to put my crease side in the crack, and you can still sort of tell where my crack is, and I can also look at my end pieces. I'm going to push this down. All right, perfect. So now, like if this was up on a wall, it would be able to stay in this position without me needing to hold it there. Next, I'm going to take some more mud and go over top of my tape. And I like to work from the middle out. And the reason being, I want to get all of the air bubbles out of this tape. So if I start here and push it this way and here and push it this way, then hopefully I get all of the bubbles out. If I just start going every which way, it's going to be really hard to get a methodical approach, right? So now my goal is to kind of just cover this with a nice layer of mud. And you can kind of see that at this point, this isn't really wide enough to reach both sides. So I'm going to switch to my other one in just a second. Can't go anymore that direction. Okay, so now I'm all the way covered up. I'm going to switch to my 12-inch here. And the other nice part about this is I'm also getting all of my screws because they were so close to my seam. If I had any other screws in my wall at this point, like maybe I have another line of screws over here, I would also need to mud over that. And that would be a lot simpler. Like if I have a screw here, then I'm just gonna mud it. Basically the idea is push all of the mud into the hole, remove all the excess, which we're about to go through on this seam too. So now I got my wider knife, which you can see is a little bit bigger. That's gonna be really helpful to spread all of this out. Also get off all of my excess at this point. And I'm going to kind of just follow this back a few times. And at this point, my goal is to have the tape completely covered, but also wanting to be mindful that I don't want to layer this thick of mud. The more mud, the more sanding you have to do. So I'm going to try to get it covered, but not excessive, right? The other thing that you can do at this point is start taking off mud from your knife. So I don't really need to be filling mud. I just scrape that along the edge. And this is going to allow me to take off more without putting down extra. The other thing that you can do at this point is taper a little bit. So what I mean by that is instead of holding this perfectly flat, I'm going to hold it a little bit at an angle. So what this is doing is leaving me a thicker line on my tape and removing more excess from this, I guess the edge, of my piece here, which is where I don't really need a lot of mud over here. I want this to be flat, right? So that's taking off a little bit of extra, and you can tell that that happened because I don't really have mud here. I do have mud where I put more pressure on this side, right? I'm going to do the same thing on my other edge, tapering it slightly. Okay, good. So now I got a nice even top coat. And then at this point, now we're going to let this dry. And unfortunately, I didn't do one ahead of time so you could see what it looks like dried. But now our steps would be, we let this dry, we come back, tomorrow. And in terms of drying time, it really depends on the temperature outside, the temperature inside. If you're in a heated home, this is going to dry, by next day. If this is in your garage or in an unheated space, it's going to take a few days, especially if it's this time of year in the winter, right? But we would let this dry, sand it all down, and then do another layer, sand it down, and that would be our finished product. So that's kind of the run through. You would do all of this the same way, so you don't need to add tape for your second run. So we just sand it, mud it again, and we're good. No other tape. So I did want to circle back to the mesh tape. So the only difference between the mesh and the paper tape in terms of the steps to actually apply it, the mesh tape has a sticky back. So that mesh, we would just roll out and stick it right onto our wall. So we would skip that first step of mudding where we put some mud into the seam to hold our tape. We don't need to do that with the mesh tape. Since it's sticky, it can hold itself up there. I would just roll it off, cut it, stick it on, and then do my mud. And like I said before, the only disadvantage to that is it is a bit thicker, so you're more likely to see that later. I'm going to need to put on more mud to cover it, and then when I sand it down, sometimes with that one you'll end up seeing your mesh tape. You'll expose it by over sanding. So just takes a little bit more finesse and patience, we'll say. But that is my basics for installing. And if anybody has questions about installing or anything we just went through, now would be a good time to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to move into patching and go through some of our different scenarios with that.
Yeah, questions, and again, reminder for anybody who joined us a little bit late, if you don't have audio on your phone and you want to ask a question, you can use the chat feature. Otherwise, feel free to unmute yourself at any point in time and jump in and ask a question.
Yeah, please do. So, I guess without further ado, I will start talking about patching. Basically, I've kind of split this up into a few different categories, basically depending on the size of what you need to patch. And like I already said, I'll send out a PowerPoint that has some pictures that will help visualize what I'm talking about. But basically, the first category is really tiny holes. So this would be like a nail hole or a screw hole, something like from a picture hanging on the wall, or little dings. That kind of stuff you can just use. You can use joint compound, or more commonly just using some kind of spackle or putty. Those are kind of one and the same in terms of terminology, but the stuff that I like to use is I think it's called, it's from DAP, DAP, the brand, but basically it's pink when it's in the tub like this, and pink when you put it on the wall, and then when it dries, it's white. So you'll know when it's time to sand it off. And that's a super easy, user-friendly. And for that, you could use a putty knife that's even smaller, like a 2-inch knife. And it's perfect for just filling in holes, remove your extra, that kind of stuff, smooth sailing. So you can patch all the holes on one wall in 10 minutes. You know, that's kind of the easy, least intense category in terms of holes, right? And I guess.
So Teresa asked what type of screws?
Oh, these are actually called drywall screws. They're coarse and like have coarse threads. I don't know how well you can see that. And it's a Phillips head bit. And you can buy these at Lowe's or Home Depot. They're called drywall screws, so pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, and that's the best way to use, or best screw to use. Good question. So next category in holes, I'm still calling them small holes, but this would be like anything less than 6 inches. So this could be, you know, your doorknob slams in and you have a doorknob size hole, you know, this big, whatever, about 6 inches or less. And this is a great chance to use some kind of a patching kit, which I started taking apart, but box just looks like this, and it's called a drywall patching kit. And basically inside it comes that spackle that I just showed you. This isn't the pink, the white one, but it's the same sort of thing. And it also comes with a little sanding block, which we would need later. And then it comes with a patch kit. And this is basically that mesh tape that I was talking about. It's got a little screen in it. And this is perfect because it's, basically I'm gonna peel off the plastic, peel off the sticky layer, just put that right over my hole, and then fill it with mud or fill it with joint compound or spackle, whatever you're using for that scenario. So this is great because you don't have to cut anything, you don't have to get drywall to patch it. You could just put this mesh screen right over it, fill it with mud, let it dry, sand it. That's kind of our easy solution for fixing. And that would you would need all the same tools that you hopefully already have. If you didn't get a patching kit, you could also just get the mesh tape that looks just like this, except it's not in a square, it's in the, the same strips like the paper, and you could just run a few strips of that over your hole and then mud it, sand it. And in this case, the mesh is perfect because it's going to hold some of that joint compound where you didn't have this, and you just start filling joint compound into the wall. If there's no mesh to catch it, then you're just basically filling that wall cavity with joint compound. So that's no good. That's why we would need this patch And it's also really nice that it already includes a sanding block, which is what you could use to sand it down. And this one is nice because on one side it's like a sandpaper, on the other it's a sponge. So you could do it, you know, dry and then also come back wet and just take off some of that additional dust. Obviously, you don't want to like get your wall sopping wet, but just clean off some of the dust. So those kits are pretty good too. I would definitely recommend using one of those. Takes out some of the guesswork, right? Next one is patching a larger hole. So, you know, if you have something that's over 6 inches, you're probably going to need to cut a piece of drywall to do that, to fill that hole. And I gotta clear out some space on my work table here. Okay, so I found my pencil. So for this, right now I have a hole in my drywall, and this is just like a hammer size hole. It's not over 6 inches, but we're gonna exaggerate it a little bit so I can go through all the steps that we would need to do if we were patching a larger hole. So let's say, you know, I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger just in terms of visually, but you can also see on the back here, the damage to this drywall is a lot bigger than what I can initially see as the hole. I have rips in the paper out to about here. So that's another good reason to go ahead and make our patch piece a little bit bigger than what we initially see, right? So what I'm going to do is I also have an extra piece here anyway. So I'm going to use this to be my patching piece. So since I already have one cut, I'm going to go ahead and mark out just where I want this to go in by just tracing a line around what I already had. I like to do it this way because then you don't need to measure and worry about getting it all perfect and straight. It's kind of hard to carry out, right? So now I got my trace line on here, which maybe you can see, maybe not. And since this is a hole inside my wall here, I can't do the same razor knife and bend because it's within the wall. So in this case, this is where I need my keyhole saw to help me cut, right? And so this is super nice because that pointy edge, like I was saying, can just, a little bit of pressure can just poke right through like that. And now I'm in, and I'm just going to follow and trace all my lines. You could also, since we already have a hole, start it here and just work your way to an edge. But I already just pushed a hole, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this out now. And boom, that's one side. I do have to cut out all four, so you have to bear with me. But I just like to punch a new one in each corner. One more here. Okay, and just like that, my old broken piece is out. My new piece is here, ready to go, hopefully. One other thing I'll say is if you are doing this, you know, probably it's on a wall, you want to be mindful of what might be behind your wall. In terms of anything that might be concerning, this would be like electrical or plumbing. Now, there's no real way to guarantee where any of that is. So what I would say is just if you can reach your hand in the hole, just kind of feel behind it. And we're not going feet, right? We're not cutting feet out of this wall. So if I have a hole here and I don't feel anything in these few inches, I'm probably good, but definitely would recommend just moving with caution, right? So now let's see if my piece is gonna fit. Looks like it will. So this is perfect. Now, next question is, well, how do I screw this in, right? There's nothing here. So I would need to put in some kind of backing, which I'm going to show you how to do. Let me just go grab those pieces. Okay, got them. So for this, basically what I have is just two like scrap pieces of wood, and I'm going to secure these in behind, and then that's what I'm going to use to screw into. So it's a bit more intensive than a patch kit, but it works just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a couple screws, and this is just easier for handling. And you would want to put in two pieces of something for a size this or a hole this size. So if I just put in one, my edges can kind of teeter totter. If I put in two, then it's going to be a lot more stable. So this part is a bit tricky because I need to hold it up while I'm screwing down. Oh, missed. Dang it, that one I missed. So good thing I just move right on over. As long as that screw's not sticking up, it's not a problem. And this is another reason that having the hole bigger helps, because now I can fit my hand behind it. Okay, so that's one piece. Go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. Make sure I can fit it in there. Good. And that screw's still sticking out a little bit. There we go, just underneath. Okay. Make sure we're all good. Do a little hand check. Okay, perfect. So now I got my backers in, and again, I like to just kind of do myself a little pencil mark of where, and you also have screws to help you know. And my piece fits, that's good. But now it kind of has some funky edges. So this is where that rasp tool comes in handy. This was one that I obviously cut out, but you can kind of see this, you know, paper, some of this over here. Basically, if that's in the way, then when I go to do my mudding, I'm going to have to go over all these little bumps. So this is where my little grater comes in handy. I can just sand some of this right on off. We're not, you know, we don't need to worry about the bottom edge because that's going to get covered, but I'm just going to do this lightly on all four sides. I will say a little dust warning, but that's a lot better, right? All my paper is kind of peeled back a little bit. Okay, so now this would go right on in here, and then I would repeat my process of taping and mudding. So we have some tape still here. And this one, I mean, it's a bit more intensive because I need to have 4 pieces of tape over it, but it's not, it's the same steps. Oh wait, you gotta screw it in first. Sorry, an important step there. That would be no good if your drywall is not secured, it's gonna fall out. But for this, I'm gonna do 4 screws. Something this size. Basically, I want to make sure all of my edges are secured. All my screws are sunk down. That's like #1 mistake or possible error.
Caitie, another question. Any tips on 90-degree joints?
90-degree joints, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm not going to demonstrate 90-degree joints, but basically they have these basically corners that you know, a 90-degree piece of like metal or plastic, and that actually goes onto your corner, and then you mud that in. And so that'll give you a bit of reinforcement on your corner. And then they make cutting knives that are actually ones for an outside corner. So it's kind of shaped like this, and you mud it along your corner. And then one is an inside shaped like this, and that you press into your corner, like corner of a room, and you mud it like that. So they do have knives, you know, you need more tools to do those, but you can also do it with these. Just go on like, you know, one side of your corner and then the other side of your corner. But those corner, saying corner a lot, but those corner tools are really great for getting a nice seamless look. So I'm not going to go through that tonight because I don't have those tools, but that would be how to go about doing that, right? So that was a good question too. So for this one, I'm going to try to cut my tape so that I don't want to have like 4 layers overlapping here. So I'm going to try to just cut it a little bit short. Right, so I'm not sticking in too much, sticking over. And then this would be same process as before, right? We'll start by putting a little bit of mud down. And I'm going to try to cover up my screws in this process. Sweet. It's kind of a lot in this. One thing I will say with mudding is a super common mistake, and especially for new drywallers, is really don't want to overdo it with your mud. So, you know, like I think I already said, but the more you mud, the more you're going to have to sand down later. So we really don't want to put, you know, a super thick layer over top of our tape. I want enough that I'm going to cover it up and it's going to, you know, stay in place, but I don't want to have so much that I'm sanding it for hours and hours, right? Like I said, the goal of this first mud is just to cover up all of our tape here, which I didn't put tape on this bottom, but you would want to tape all of those. And the corners are kind of hard when all this tape intersects, but you can see it didn't take too much to get that mudded down. And then for, you know, a patch job that's this size, obviously by the time I go 4 inches, I basically just have mud over this whole thing. So I would just go ahead and fill this in, but you still want to go through that same process of making sure that your tape gets all the way worked edge to edge so that you don't have big air bubbles in it at the end. And then I could start going over and start getting a seamless look here. So at this point, I got a pretty solid coat on here. I'm just gonna try to smooth it out a little bit now. At this point, this is where it gets tricky because like, I want to just keep working on it. I'm like, oh, I can make this a little smoother. Oh, I could do this a little better. Just go ahead and let it dry. That's what I mean by don't overdo it. Don't do too much that you make just more of a mess. Let this dry. Come back, sand it down. I haven't talked about sanding yet, but basically you can go with a couple different options. I always recommend using doing everything by hand because I think when you use an electric sander, it's really easy to just overdo it. If I over sand this, I'm going to expose my tape. It's going to start peeling off. You know, I don't want to be going backwards at that point in the process. I'm like eyes on the finish line. I'm about to complete this project. So I don't want to overdo it. And you have a lot more control when you do stuff by hand. So these here are just little sanding blocks, just kind of coarse. They come in different grit of sandpaper, but these blocks are really nice because it's easy to hold. Just gonna go back and forth like that, sand my surface down. This is another variety that has some bigger grooves on the front here. That could be fine, but I think just these regular flat ones are good. And then this is just sheets of sandpaper, which you can fold up and, you know, kind of use for a little bit longer. And what I like to do is actually hold my sandpaper like this, where I have one of my fingers exposed on the bottom. And so that way I can actually feel the surface I'm going over as I'm sanding it. And I could tell like, oh, okay, that feels pretty smooth there. Let me keep moving. Or when I'm going over these edges, I'm like, oh, I can still feel like a big bump here. Need to keep sanding, right? And then another recommendation that I have in terms of getting a smooth finished look is sanding it in circles. So if we just go back and forth, I'm probably going to have pretty heavy pressure on one spot, pretty light in another spot. So if I do circles, then that gives me a lot more even distribution of sanding, and it's going to help blend these edges with the actual wall, right? So that's another recommendation I have in terms of sanding. And then, like I said, once you get that first coat down, dried, sanded, then we come back and we do a second coat. And really that second coat is just to help make it look really good. This doesn't look great right now. I could see high spots, low spots. So after I sand it, that second coat is going to help me just even all of that out, help me get my edges a little bit cleaner. By the time you do that second sand through, you're going to be in pretty good shape, right? And you could do more than that. Like, let's say you do your second coat and it doesn't look so great. You can do another coat. There's no harm at all in that, right? But 2 is kind of your standard slash minimum. Yeah, so I think I'm about wrapped up. I'm going to look through my little tips for success. I think we covered most of them. But like I said, Tracy's going to send this out so you have a copy of it. And it's also got pictures of some of those corner tools and things like that that you guys can help visualize. But I'm going to run through my top 10 tips here. I think we got most of them, but checking behind walls before we're cutting, right? So doing a little hand check in that wall cavity behind the hole, definitely recommend. We talked about the screw heads, right? We want to make sure that all of those screws are sunk down in, so we're not seeing those in our final mudding process, right? Oh, one thing we didn't talk about, but let's say I'm working with this can of mud here, and it's been sitting there for a few minutes. Some of this stuff on my knife has started to dry, and basically I don't want to get dried little clumps of mud into my mud that I'm working on. So you want to keep these tools clean. One way to do that is to scrape it off on the edge here before, get some of that dried stuff off. So when I go here, I'm not dragging pieces of, you know, hard mud through my soft, wet mud. So that's another one that I hadn't mentioned yet. Our favorite, don't overdo the mudding, right? We talked about tapering the edges, right? So using a bit of an angle to help transition the seam to the rest of the wall. Sanding in between coats, of course, sanding in circles. Oh yeah, one other thing that is helpful, especially if you're doing this inside a finished house, but when you're doing the sanding, either you yourself or have a buddy help you, you can use a vacuum and just put it right underneath the sanding. So if I'm standing right here on the wall, having a vacuum, and that's going to really cut down on the dust, especially if you're doing this over carpet or in like a finished house, right? So just suction as you go along. It really takes up a lot of extra dust, right? And then one other thing that can help is using some kind of a textured spray on your wall. So let's say you do it and you're like, I don't know, I can see all these mistakes. One thing that you could do, and I think a lot of people have textured walls anyway, but I make textured spray in cans, and it's basically the material of joint compound that you spray out, and it kind of makes a pattern look. So it could be like, you know, a thicker texture or a thinner one that looks more like an orange peel. And if you use texture over a drywall patch, or if you're trying to match a pattern that's already in your wall, that really helps tie it together. And I have pictures of that in the slide as well, but you can get a can for like 10 or 15 bucks, and it's gonna, you know, turn your job into a nice finished look and blend it with the rest of your house, rest of your room. So that's super helpful. So yeah, I think that's kind of everything I got. I'm happy to answer any questions or comments. If not, I know Tracy is going to send out a video recording of this, as well as a PowerPoint slide that I've done that, yeah, like I said, has pictures. And yeah, if nobody has questions, then I hope everybody had a good time tonight. And thanks for coming.
And thanks, Caitie. Going once, going twice. Any questions? Any more questions? All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And like she mentioned, you'll get an email tomorrow with a PowerPoint presentation and a link to the video presentation. All right.
Perfect. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
All righty. See you later.
Bye.